The topic of this video is, it's something that's come up for me a lot, and I don't think that there's one answer for everybody. But there are some things that I have experienced in relation to wealth, in relation to wealth and its role in spiritual life. It's a really tricky topic, but I think it's worth talking about. So, wealth is energy. Money is energy. It's neither good or bad. The issue with managing wealth while on a spiritual path is that as humans, it's very difficult to not attach to wealth when we have it. It's very difficult to not rely on the energy of wealth if we're used to having it. And, wealth can be very helpful. It's been very helpful to me in order to allow me to take time away from the working world, to focus on my inner work, to contemplate, to spend extended periods of time in nature. When we are, working many hours every week and we're very focused on having to pay the bills and deal with debt payments, that takes a lot of our focus and energy, and we don't have a lot of time for our personal growth. So wealth has been a blessing to me in allowing me to step outside of that cycle. Wealth is a great energy when it's used for charity, for creation of new systems, and for blessing other people, for investing in other people, investing in things that make this world a better place. In many cases, wealth is required. And I've seen a lot of people do a lot of amazing, responsible things with their wealth. When wealth came to me at a couple points in my life, at first it was very exciting because it allowed me to experience things that I'd always wanted to experience, go places that I wanted to go, travel, accumulate material possessions that I'd always dreamed of having. I never thought that my true happiness would come from those things, but there was an attachment to the desire of accumulating those things and thinking that I would feel a lot more balanced and fulfilled once I was able to buy those things and pay for those trips. And that was true up until a point. It seemed like that was happening at first. And I really enjoyed those things, and I have, gratitude for those things and experiences. Then one day, a point came where when I would go for that next purchase, that next trip, that next experience that required me to pay money for, there was nothing. It wasn't lighting up that part of the brain that used to light up. I also noticed that during this time, my spiritual connection was not as dynamic as it had been when I didn't have access to that wealth, when I had to trust and pray for what I needed, when I wasn't sure what decision to make, and I didn't have a large quantity of wealth to rely on for my security. I literally had to rely on spiritual guidance from, the God inside. And as tight squeezes as those times were actually precious because I received a lot of serendipity, a lot of miracles. I was always provided for. And I really felt that Spirit was responding to my prayers, maybe not in the ways that I was expecting or hoped, but in ways that were really perfect. And that before that wealth and with this spiritual connection and provision, I developed a great faith that I never could have developed if I had steadily had a lot of wealth. I learned that wealth is extremely useful in this material world to create, that's for sure. It brought those blessings that I mentioned. In the spiritual dimensions, wealth doesn't matter. I was in an ayahuasca experience a few years ago that I'll never forget. And in plant medicine ceremonies, we can travel to different dimensions. The shamans often talk about an upper world, a middle world, and a lower world. So the upper world is like, very very blissful realm of the angels and like the higher dimensional beings. The middle world corresponds to this material world and issues and relationships that we have here, and in the ceremony we can get insight about those material world things. And then there's also a lower world that some people would call the hell realms, the subconscious realms. And these are places where there's things that we hide from ourselves. Egoic, mind-based, without the heart stuff. And we all have those elements as part of us, and for the most part, we don't like to look at them. And when we get to those levels, when we visit those realms in ceremonies or in meditation even, as uncomfortable as they are, they can be very transformative in teaching things that we will never forget. And so I found myself in a lower world dimension in this ceremony. And it was very, very uncomfortable. One of the most uncomfortable experiences I've ever had in my life. And I was in this dark place. It seemed like it was like dungeon-like. It was hard to see and make out what was going on, but there was a lot of people in agony. And it wasn't so much they were like physically suffering, they were in agony with regret. And they were in agony with kind of going around in circles on these decisions that they'd made in life. And there was just a lot of mental anguish and suffering and regret going on in there. And I was down there too. And I remember thinking while I was there, wow, like I've really trusted in my own wealth. I've trusted in my own personality, my own abilities. Instead of just appreciating those things as gifts, I have thought that those things were my identity and my value came from those things, which is very easy as a human being, very normal. But when I was in that deep place of realization of where I was really at, I realized that outside of the body, None of those things matter. They have no value and they don't do anything for us. They belong on earth as gifts, as assets that we should never attach to. And I realized that the more attached I was to some of those things, the more I had blocked out the dynamic relationship I could have with nature, with universal law, with spirit, with being provided for and having prayers answered. Insights that don't come from the logical mind, but that come through the heart from the higher dimensional spirit world. Those attachments that I had at the time of the ceremony were making me spiritually poor, were making me spiritually impoverished and blocked from higher riches that aren't visible to other people. So in this very dark, very uncomfortable, physically nauseous space I found myself in, it seemed rather timeless. It seemed like I could have been here for a long time and not even realize that there was an out. I looked around and I couldn't find any help. I prayed, I couldn't find any help. And in that realm, I found something that I didn't know I had. And I only found it because all of my other tricks weren't working. And what I found was my will. When we're in dark places like that, and nothing's working that usually works, what does remain and is always available to us is our willpower. And so what I did in there, after what seemed like forever in this disgusting place, that really was a personification of my mind and where my ego was at. I remember finally digging in my heels to the ground, to the floor of the ceremony room, being like, you know what? If I'm here right now, I better figure out how to make it. If I can't get out of here in this split second, this moment of time, I better figure out how things work in here. And even though I felt very weak and very vulnerable and very lost in this egoic world that I had created for myself, I dug my heels into the floor and I took the stance of a warrior. Not a warrior that was out to like harm other people. A warrior that was going to use her will to move through whatever shadowlands exist that were probably created by my own mind anyways. Willpower to face the illusions that I'd created for myself about how wealth, personality, human ability and training is the answer. And admitting that those things can't be relied on after being on earth. They're not going to mean anything when we die. And we can't take them with us. They were not available to me in this out-of-body realm. So I took the stance of a warrior. And sometimes being a warrior means simply having the courage to look at the illusions and the lies that we've told ourselves and the parts of our ego that we've relied on for our value and our identity. And the minute that I took that stance and shifted my energy into being a warrior that would look at anything, even the darkest of dark, as it was revealing itself in that moment, a light, started like a small pinhole, but a light appeared to me in the distance. And I held my will, and I held the warrior stance, and I also focused on that pinhole light, and it was moving closer and closer and closer to me. And at a certain point, it got close enough that I was able to recognize the energy of who that light represented. And in that ceremony, in that moment, I saw the figure of Jesus, and he looked very cosmic. He had like galactic, cosmic characteristics. There were stars around him, and he almost looked like a stained glass window, but in 3D. And it brought me the greatest comfort. It was the second time I've encountered the being of Jesus in my life in a visionary way. I spoke in my near-death experience in one of the videos about how I saw Jesus sitting on the end of my bed when I was a little girl, and it brought me great comfort. So this was the second time I had a visionary experience with him. And pretty quickly, his light lit up this whole place. And he looked at me and he said, "Don't worry, I know my way around here. I know my way around here. And you're going to learn your way around here too." And after that, I don't remember so much. I can't bring the memory back of where we went. But it seemed like we went into a light visionary tunnel, and we were flying through the cosmos in complete freedom. So today I'm just reflecting, actually after watching a video from another YouTuber, John St. Julien. I'm gonna link his video below in case this topic interests you. After watching his video about this topic, I really started to realize where I was at with it myself, and where I've been at with it. And it's not over, you know. These are things that we grapple with throughout our entire life. But I just wanted to share these thoughts in case anyone needs to hear them and be reminded that wealth, personality, possessions, those things we don't take with us. They don't exist in the spiritual world. And so relying on them is going to be a complete dead end when you find yourself out of the body. What does have value out of the body is the attributes of courage, love, self-acceptance, faith, trust, patience, perseverance. So these things we must focus on and develop alongside all of the other things that this world promotes, if we want to be able to navigate the realms outside of this existence. And so I know that in my near-death experience video, I talked about returning to oneness, to the loving presence. And that was also very real. It was even more real than this lower dimension. But sometimes there's a purification that happens when we are doing our spiritual work. And in order to be able to prepare ourselves for that presence wants to rid us of attachments and illusions. And that happens in so many different ways. For me, this is one way that one of my illusions at the time needed to be purified. Very dramatic. It's not for everyone, but that was a temporary realm that created a purification. So as difficult and scary as it may sound, it was temporary, and it did end up bringing a lot of freedom.